Road Signs. Chapter 13. Rams of the State Farm. He looks at him, and the ram looks him straight in the eye. He felt terrified, Yermil the huntsman. "What?" he says. "I don't remember a ram looking anyone in the eye like that, but it's okay." He starts stroking his fur, saying, "Bayasha, Bayasha," and the ram suddenly bares his teeth, and he too, Bayasha, Bayasha. Ivan Turgenev. Bezhin Meadow. Now I was riding alone, and for greater confidence I put on Vladimir Pavlovich's jacket and even pinned on his cap. And it always seemed to me that if you put on a uniform, then your life has changed. You can't just put on anything in life. They told me about a man who found a postman's uniform, started wearing it, and they made him deliver letters. Or you get a fur coat from a master, and that's it. You're already among the servants, and, trembling with horror, you're afraid of disgrace. And if you have a cap with a star on, then you can't escape fate. This headdress will lead you through life like a sweetheart. But it was hot in the cap, and I immediately threw it on the right seat, where I usually sat when my comrade was driving the train. Now I was driving, guided only by the track signs. I slowed down where I could, wisely avoiding switches at low speed, and looked carefully into the distance to see if a dead oncoming train was looming on my way. I was too lazy to look at the maps left by the mathematician. Spring was raging around me. I hadn't seen anything like this since childhood. All this greenery, flowers, and smells drove me crazy, and I opened the window in the cabin, only occasionally glancing at the narrow screen of the dosimeter. The dosimeter behaved quietly, occasionally beeping, but only occasionally. Once I stopped by the Istra River, and having measured the radiation level, it turned out to be background. Went into the water. It was an absolutely amazing feeling, warm water in shallow water, flowing around the body. My inner panicker told me that, who knows, some snake would swim up to me, but at this point I didn't care. I had lost everyone and was alone. The predictions seemed to have come true, and if some frog with a delta mutation were to attack me now, it would be natural and not at all surprising. Returning to the train, I suddenly heard a strange rustling in the last car. Pulling the machine gun off my shoulder, I carefully opened the door. What a thing! 3 little Buddhists were sitting here, apparently, all this time eating only lotus pills. They lived here in sleeping bags and survived the winter. It's amazing that they didn't die. But when I looked inside the carriage, I realized what was going on. The 3 of them had destroyed almost the entire supply of food hidden inside. A fine thing. Imagine my surprise if I had counted on it. Well, I did count on it, but the terrible need had not yet arrived. One could seek consolation in the fact that it would be better for the trouble to happen now, so as not to be the last drop in the ocean, as the head of the Sokol station said when the epidemic began, and almost all the pigs died. I threw them out, and after a little hesitation did not spare the paradise on the river bank, declaring to my charges, "Look here, my orange friends, until you wash yourself and do your laundry, you are not going anywhere." The orange friends did not object. They rolled off their diapers and climbed into the river. Apparently, none of them thought about the mutant frogs. When they climbed out, I suddenly became touched. All 3 were almost children. They could have been my sons, small, puny, with gray St. Petersburg skin. Naked, they seemed even younger. Well, I could do what Vladimir Pavlovich said, I thought. I could found my own sect. I'll be a prophet. I'll have 3 apostles. That's not enough, but better than nothing. Then we'll get Madonnas and build a house by the river. We'll grow something and eat frogs. But I immediately pushed that thought away. What kind of guru would I be? And what could I give these pill-takers? Why would they crawl out of their lotus jungles? And if they did, they'd be completely incapacitated. One good thing, I wasn't alone anymore. A day later, having advanced only a little, I saw a fresh wheel track next to the tracks, right opposite the whistle sign. Someone drove a tractor here, and drove by recently, after the rains. I armed the Buddhists with machine guns, although I understood that they were of little use, but let them just hold weapons, and went with them on reconnaissance. We passed the forest shelter belt, which during this time had grown, and began to resemble a simple forest, and immediately ran into a rusty but strong fence, and a gate in it. On the gate was a sign, Sovkhoz, Solnechny. A tin sun was attached above the name, which looked rather scary, about the same as a mutant hedgehog should look, or the flower of the cactus queen of the night, which I almost forgot about. I carefully examined the gate. There was no lock or bolt on them. Only a short wire held their halves, so that they would not swing open in vain, but 2 tracks led there. We entered the gate, and carefully and furtively moved forward across a gigantic field. Not a single building was visible to the horizon, and we were already tired of walking, when suddenly the field ended in a ravine overgrown with dense hazel. Here, too, a stream was babbling, and the background was also normal. We made a few more radial exits. Nothing worthy was found nearby, only an old tractor without glass, sunk into the field up to the cabin, and some kind of agricultural building without a roof, similar to a former barn. But on the distant hill there was a tall church with a tented bell tower and a golden hemisphere of a dome shining in the sun. If the dome was golden and had not flown off over the years, then it meant that people lived there. And what's more, if they take care of the temple, then it is not just a place to live, but a whole structure, a farm. Structure. And I remembered our argument with Vladimir Pavlovich. The only thing that bothered me was that instead of a cross, both on the church and on the bell tower, the same sun with rare golden rays was burning, which we had seen above the gate. So, with a clear conscience, we settled down by its wall for the night in order to study the issue tomorrow. I lit a fire, and an hour later the Buddhists stuffed wild potatoes the size of walnuts into the ashes, bitter but still filling. After eating, I began to slowly fall asleep. And in this dream, I was standing at the edge of exactly the same field, only instead of a tractor, an airplane had crashed into the field. It wasn't my father's plane or the one I flew to St. Petersburg on a little less than a year ago. It was a large, predatory machine, a jet attack aircraft, and I was surprised that it only hit the ground with its nose. I was standing in the middle of the field and saw a vague figure in the distance. Someone was walking diagonally across the field toward me, kicking up dry dust with their feet. The clouds of dust around the person's boots resembled wings. I realized that it was my father walking toward me, and I wanted to somehow prepare for his arrival. And then I realized that I was wearing a parachute system. I threw off the straps and unzipped the jumpsuit. There was no doubt, in this dream I was a pilot, and most likely a shot-down pilot. But how could I have a parachute if I fell out of the sky in this jet monster? But at this point, I could no longer follow the logic. My father came up to me, and putting his arm around my shoulders, said that now was the time to look at the stars. There was nothing more important than the stars and moral laws. "What are you talking about?" I asked. "It's too bad we didn't meet, and I don't know where to look for you. Everything will find itself," answered my father. "The main thing is to stay calm. The main thing is to stay calm." I thought with indignation that this phrase really was from my childhood, but it was not my father who said it. It was said in some movie, the name and plot of which I could not remember. "Everything will find itself," he repeated. The main thing is not to disturb the harmony. Harmony, my son, is such a thing that is like heights. It is lost quickly, and the consequences are often fatal. Do something not according to the rules, and it will leave a mark for life. I woke up from the delicious smell of fried meat. Opening my eyelids, I discovered that the Buddhists were roasting a small lamb. Here it is, vegetarianism within the framework of faith. Here they are, the children. They dug up an animal from somewhere and brought it to the eldest. Stop. A ram is not a boar, not a hare, not a squirrel. Where did they get it from? Guys, where did this wealth come from? I asked, trying to drive away the growing anxiety. Yes, here, not far away, about 2 kilometers, answered the most nimble. That's where they were grazing. And the owner? What owner? No one saw us. So, idiots, get ready. Get ready. You'll finish eating later. Here I should have insisted that they drop the meat, that they drop everything, and run away headlong. But I didn't insist. Apparently he lost his knack, let himself go. Although we left the place where we spent the night, we wandered slowly. And soon I realized that we were being followed, that we were being chased. A jeep from which a machine gun burst, lashed out, started to dust across the field. The owners of the Sunrams were still very far away and were shooting at random, but they only killed one boy on the first try. He died almost instantly, his nose in the ground. Run, run, freaks. I urged not so much my companions as myself. Turning around, I saw that one of them was still dragging a ram carcass, dripping with red juice on his shoulder. Drop it, you fool. I screamed, but it was too late. The machine gun started pounding again, and fountains of dry earth rose between us. The Buddhist stopped, crouching awkwardly, and then they hit him too. The third one still managed to run up to me, but I realized that he was wounded. There was no time to think, and I picked him up, took the weight of the little body on my shoulder, and ran to the gate. They shot at us a few more times, but it felt like it was more of a warning. You can't mess around with sheep here, and it was clear that you can't mess around with uninvited fools either. The open UAs slowed down and turned around. At that moment, for the first and last time, I saw the residents of the Solnechny state farm in white shirts with embroidered collars, with runic bandages on their foreheads. They looked like Slavic gods, as they were depicted in fairy tales. True, like gods, with a large caliber machine gun. Puffing, with a mooing load on my back, I ran away from the gates of the sunny state farm. I stopped at the railroad tracks and felt how the boy had become heavier. I took off his orange cloak and warm sweater, simply tore his t-shirt and felt the wound. The bullet entered the little Buddhist's left shoulder blade, shattered the bone and exited diagonally under the right collarbone. With bloody, shaking hands, I took a wad of clean glass cleaners from my pocket and lifted the boy up. I put my knee under his back and began to bandage the wound, trying to stop the blood spurting from under his collarbone. The shreds of shirt and napkins quickly turned black and were soaking wet. Blood was flowing from his mouth, and I realized that there was nothing to catch here. Everything was terribly stupid. Everything was pointless, and nothing could be fixed. I had not become some kind of guru, and my foolish apostles were killed. But in reality, I had lost my way between Moscow and Petersburg boys, and now the last of them was lying in my arms, and I could hear the blood gurgling and bubbling in his throat, his breathing stopping. The boy was dead, and the warm summer wind was now stirring his still living hair. I had never buried anyone myself, and relied only on what I had read in books. I had to go up to the train to get a trenching tool. It was hard to dig right on the ridge because of the compacted stones, and I even fell off the ridge, hitting my head painfully on a stone. I had to step aside, just under a track sign, in the shape of an irregular circle, calling for sound signals. Then, without getting up from my knees, I began to dig a hole with a sapper shovel. Here the earth was already damp and pliable. I was in a hurry, but some kind of suffocation seized my throat. Reactive psychosis, as one of my now dead companions said. Finally, I dug a waist-deep grave. It took a long time, so the earth received my Buddhist only in the bright morning light. I covered his face with the edge of an orange cloak and covered his little body with yellow, damp clay. There was no need to hurry now. It was all over, like in those old thick novels about a people's war, where one Russian kills another. The sun was rising in the smoky haze above the tracks. Its rays ran along the silver sides of the missile train, in which I was now absolutely alone. After the Snigiri station, I discovered that there was no further passage. The tracks ended in front of me. Further on, I discovered a lake of frozen glass, which I initially thought was the epicenter of the explosion. The frozen glass was radioactive, but not very strong. But it wasn't that the area was radioactive. It was that the rails had run out. The rails had melted into the porous surface of the pit. Another 100 meters, and they would disappear into this once frozen mass. I sat in the sealed cabin for half a day, gathering my courage. Then I got some sleep, took stock of all the stuff I had, and filled my backpack with it. In the morning, I went out onto Volokolamsk Highway, past a melted tank on a pedestal, and some other equipment that somehow got to this place. I found a bicycle leaning against a fence nearby, but it didn't help me much. I managed to ride a kilometer on the rims, and the bicycle gave up the ghost. But near Dodovsk, I went to the station again, and to my delight, there was a perfectly serviceable motor locomotive there. True, I spent 2 days looking for diesel for it, but it turned out to be so rotten that even the miracle fuel tablets barely worked. But thanks to my efforts, the motor locomotive finally started coughing with its engine, like an old man, and I realized that it wouldn't last long. However, I didn't need to last long. I needed to get to Moscow. So I got to Leningradskaya station on the Ridskaya direction. Then the question arose of how to get underground. The Sokol depot had a gate with the Podmoskovnaya platform, which was further behind the bridge. Apparently it was on my right, but it was unclear how to get there on a rail car. The bridge was intact, but the ground pedestrian crossing had collapsed on the way, and the rail car would definitely not move these huge pieces of concrete. The elbow, that is, the tunnel, was close, but you can't bite it, or you could get off and try to get to Voikovskaya with your simple belongings, but they could still be fighting with the anarchists there. But what was going on there now, on Voikovskaya, was completely unclear. In a year, everything could change both there and on Sokol. You could walk along Sareva Street to the ventilation shafts, or above, to the Almaz Scientific and Production Association, where the giant bomb shelters underneath led to the Sokol, right to the canning shops of the pork factory. But you had to be on your guard with the Almaz people. They didn't like people from agricultural and pig breeding stations. Techies, they didn't treat strangers well. And it was unclear whether our passwords worked for them. It was much easier to fire a burst at a figure climbing towards you, or just ignore the knock on the small hermetic gate. And then I decided that I would do the easier thing. Another entrance to the metro was from the side of the aviators' shelters. It was located on the territory of the Mikoyan plant. I went there, sweating under my heavy backpack. I made 2 special trips and set up a hiding place right at the entrance to the plant. They were exactly the same turnstiles as at the Znamya Truda plant. I took the lid off one of them and carefully packed the box with miracle pills for diesel fuel, a mutation monitor, and other exact science of the late mathematician. I wanted to believe that he was dead, although I remembered how the head of the Sokol station said that you need to distinguish the dead from the restless. For some reason, It seemed to me that the mathematician could well have become such a restless person. I kept only his ledger and hard drives from the cameras with flight information and maps. I did not mind parting with them, passing them off as the result of our journey. Having spent the night right in the deserted building of the plant, I found a bomb shelter and discovered that its door opened with a standard code. Long ago, several of our stations agreed that the same code would be set on the mechanical locks, so that a person from the expeditions to the top, caught in danger, could return, not through his station, but through a friendly one. This was of no use to anyone. The participants of both expeditions disappeared without a trace. But the code did not accidentally disappear from my head. And if I forgot it, no problem. In the ledger of the mathematician, the book of secrets of our subway, I found it, this code, and many other curious numbers. And so I stepped onto a long staircase, which immediately enveloped me in the familiar smell of the dungeon. It was its own Moscow smell, not like the smells of the St. Petersburg metro. For a long time I wandered along the corridors, walked past doors, behind which there were undoubtedly people, because rustling and knocking sounds were heard from there. Obviously, the sentries ran after them to the peepholes to see who was wandering around the exclusion zone. At some point, when I ran into another hermetic door, the intercom nearby came to life and rather rudely asked me what kind of weirdo I was. A very strange question from a small iron grate in the wall. But I answered honestly, electrical installation work, Sokol Station. At the same time, I didn't lie at all. I didn't even call myself an electrician because I was an electrician in my previous life. I was not at all sure that I was an electrician now. There was a conference behind the door. It was immediately clear that they were conferring there. "Call the pilot?" someone asked. Here's another pilot, right next to me. That's all I needed, I thought. But behind the door they pressed something with a noticeable grinding sound and opened the entrance to a narrow bypass corridor for me. I walked along it, got into the right tunnel, and moved towards the border of Sokol.